Well, good morning. Welcome to another edition of Take Five. We're actually going to get into some stuff today. All right. I know you've been waiting. We're not talking all about sacrifices and stuff today. We got other things. So, Leviticus 5, verse 1. If anyone sins because they do not speak up when they hear a public charge to testify regarding something they have seen or learned about, they will be held responsible. All right. Now, this is, for example, if you're called into court and you're asked for a testimony and you don't give it, it says you're going to be held responsible, which means you're going to be in trouble with God. Now, it doesn't say here specifically what it is, but if we keep reading, I think we get an idea. Verse 2, if anyone becomes aware that they are guilty, if they unwittingly touch anything ceremonially unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean animal, wild or domestic, or of any unclean creature that moves along the ground, and they are unaware that they've become unclean, but then they come to realize their guilt, or if they touch human uncleanness, anything that would make them unclean. And you can go back and look at all the different things that would make them unclean. Anyway, if somehow they accidentally touch something and it makes them unclean, it says, but then they learn of it and realize their guilt, or if anyone thoughtlessly takes an oath to do anything, whether good or evil, in any manner one might carelessly swear about, even though they are unaware of it, but then they learn of it and realize their guilt. When anyone becomes aware that they are guilty in any of these matters, they must confess in what way they have sinned. And you see this quite often in the Old Testament, and it's really good practice in the New Testament. When you mess up, you should confess it. And it's saying here, if you've touched something unclean or you've done something you know you shouldn't have done, you confess it. Okay, these aren't big sins. These aren't breaking the Ten Commandments, but these are things where you're not so sure that you sinned, but then you realize you did. Okay, verse 6, as a penalty for the sin they have committed, they must bring to the Lord a female lamb or goat from the flock as a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for them for their sin. Anyone who cannot afford a lamb is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the Lord as a penalty for their sin. Then verse 11, if anyone cannot afford 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, they brings an offering for their sin, a tenth of an ephah of the finest flour for a sin offering. And what you see here, and you see this over and over again in the Old Testament as well, is that the poor were allowed to offer other things other than animals if they couldn't afford animals, and God accepted it. And that's true today. God accepts. He understands your situation, and he wants whatever you can offer him. But if you can afford something nice, then you need to offer God something nice. All right. But if you can't, then he understands and he's good with it. But you got to offer him something. You can't come to God empty-handed. All right. Verse 14, the Lord said to Moses, when anyone is unfaithful to the Lord by sinning unintentionally in regard to any of the Lord's holy things, they are to bring to the Lord as a penalty a ram from the flock, one without defect and of the proper value in silver, according to the sanctuary shekel. It is a guilt offering. All right. And so you're trying to offer something to atone for your guilt, and we know it won't eventually actually take away your guilt. Only the blood of Christ can do that. But they tried. This is how they tried to do it back then. Verse 17, if anyone sins and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though they do not know it, they are guilty and will be held responsible. So even if you don't know you've sinned, you're still guilty, is what it says. All right? And we need to have that attitude. I didn't know. Okay, that's not an excuse. If you've sinned, you're guilty. Verse 18, they are to bring to the priest as a guilt offering a ram from the flock, one without defect and of the proper value. In this way, the priest will make atonement for them for the wrong they've committed unintentionally, and they will be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. They've been guilty of wrongdoing against the Lord. All right, and sometimes we mess up and we don't even realize it. But thankfully, Christ died, and that took away all our guilt for intentional or unintentional sins. Back then, they had to offer animals. We don't, and I'm glad about that. But at least we got to get into some more stuff today. All right. there was still a lot of animal sacrifice, but there was a little more to it than just that. Hey, we're going to be in chapter 6, verse 1 on the next edition of Take 5.